Stop scrolling. The investigation has taken a turn that nobody expected. Newly uncovered records don't just raise questions, they point toward a specific type of suspect investigators believe was involved. And what these findings reveal about that suspect profile, it changes everything. Before we break down these new insights, here's the quick backdrop. Expanded fully, so the way of the situation is clear. 2 young siblings disappeared, without leaving behind a single meaningful clue. Not a footprint, not a dropped item, not even something as small as a smudge on the ground that could point investigators in a specific direction. In most missing child cases, even when a trail goes cold, there is something, a belonging, a witness who saw a movement, a piece of the timeline that lines up cleanly. Here, nothing has behaved the way experts would normally expect. There were no footprints, even though the areas around the home were soft enough that trained search teams believed any small movement should have left an impression. There were no belongings found, no clothing snagged on branches, no toys, nothing that might indicate the children traveled to the woods or along any of the surrounding paths. And perhaps most unsettling, there's been no reliable eyewitness timeline. Different accounts offered different windows, and none aligned perfectly with the physical evidence or the lack of it. For months, this case has been surrounded by confusion. Investigators were dealing with conflicting accounts about the last time the children were seen, missing minutes in the early timeline that no one could confidently explain, and pieces of evidence that should have helped but instead opened more questions. Every attempt to reconstruct the sequence of events seemed to run into the same wall. The details simply did not connect the way they were supposed to. But that confusion, all those mismatched pieces, is exactly why today's update is so shocking. Behind the scenes, investigators have been quietly reanalyzing the case using tools and data that weren't available in the early days. They've gone back to the last digital records, including time-stamped activity, device data, and background information that helps narrow down movements. They've rechecked terrain data, comparing the natural environment with what would realistically happen if children tried to move through it. And they re-examined previously overlooked statements, especially those that didn't seem important at first but now hold new relevance. And from all of that, the digital review, the terrain analysis, the re-evaluated witness accounts, a clear pattern has finally emerged. The latest records investigators analyzed weren't dramatic at first glance, but when expanded, it becomes clear they held the biggest clue uncovered so far in this investigation. These records included several categories of data that, on their own, didn't seem groundbreaking. Yet when investigators laid them side by side, the pattern was impossible to ignore. First, they reviewed the final confirmed time window when both children were verifiably seen by someone other than a household member. This wasn't just a rough estimate. Investigators reconstructed the moment using every available timestamp, cross-referencing digital activity, routine patterns, and any external observations. That window was narrower than the public initially believed, and that tighter frame meant there was far less time for the children to have moved anywhere on their own without being noticed. Then investigators examined movement gaps that couldn't logically be explained by the possibility of Lilly and Jack wandering off. These gaps weren't small. They were large enough that, if the children had tried to walk through the woods or along nearby paths, they would have had to leave clear, identifiable signs that trained search teams would have recognized immediately. The terrain simply does not allow 2 young children to move far without leaving some trace of disturbance. Next came the environmental analysis. Teams familiar with the area conducted a detailed review of environmental evidence, and what they found was striking. There were no signs at all of 2 small children moving through the surrounding landscape. No broken brush in direction they would have logically traveled. No shifted soil or disturbed leaves. No scent trails for K9 units to follow. Nothing consistent with child movement in any direction. When investigators put these findings together, the conclusion was no longer speculative. It was unmistakable and supported by every measurable indicator available. The children could not have left the property alone. This single conclusion wiped out months of theories. Theories about wandering, accidental travel, or getting lost in the woods. Removing those possibilities forced investigators to confront the implications of what remained. And that leads directly to the next shocking insight. And here's the part everyone is talking about. Expanded fully, so the weight of this shift is unmistakable. Now that the latest records have ruled out the possibility of a spontaneous walk-off, investigators have changed direction in a way that immediately grabbed national attention. Instead of trying to fit the disappearance into theories built on chance, confusion, or accident, they have shifted their focus toward a specific type of suspect, not a named individual, but a behavior profile shaped entirely by evidence, movement patterns, and the conditions at the scene. When analysts compared the cleaned-up timeline, the environmental data, and the updated witness reviews, they found that the person responsible, whoever they may be, fits three defining traits that are impossible to overlook. 1. Familiarity with the area. This individual did not randomly stumble onto property or wander into the woods by accident. Every detail suggests a level of comfort and awareness that a stranger simply wouldn't have. They knew the terrain, how to move through it quietly, how to approach without drawing attention, and how to leave without leaving behind the typical signs search teams expect. Whether that familiarity came from living nearby, visiting previously, or knowing the household personally, investigators say it's clear. This was someone who understood the environment far too well for it to be coincidence. 2. Minimal disturbance at the scene. The lack of disruption inside and around the home is one of the strongest indicators investigators are relying on. There was no forced entry, nothing broken, no evidence of a struggle, and no loud or chaotic event that neighbors reported hearing. The scene remained so undisturbed that search teams initially believed the children must have walked off on their own, until new evidence disproved that entirely. Whoever was involved acted in a way that was controlled, quick, and unnervingly confident. 3. Comfort operating within a narrow time window. The timeline is tight, extremely tight. The disappearance happened silently, during a short gap that most people would never risk. This was someone who understood exactly how much time they had, when adults were occupied, and how to move without being seen. That level of precision suggests planning, not impulse. Put together, these three traits paint a picture far different from what many assumed early in the investigation. This is not the profile of a random passerby or an inexperienced outsider. It suggests someone closer, someone more calculated, and someone far more aware of the environment and routine than previously believed. These new findings don't identify a specific individual, and investigators have been very clear about that. But they do narrow the focus to a much clearer type of suspect. Expanding this shows just how dramatically the direction of the investigation has shifted. For months, one of the biggest challenges in the case was the sheer number of possibilities. With no confirmed trail, no solid timeline, and no physical clues pointing toward a direction of travel, investigators had to consider almost every scenario imaginable. That meant looking into strangers passing through the area, tourists, drivers, hikers, and even people unfamiliar with the region who may have happened to be nearby. Those possibilities created a massive investigative field, one that could take months or even years to fully eliminate. But the latest findings have effectively wiped out huge sections of that field. The evidence now rules out strangers, because the scene shows no signs of someone approaching blindly or moving through property without awareness. A stranger would almost certainly have triggered noise, movement, or visible disturbance, none of which occurred. It rules out random wanderers, because someone unfamiliar with the property or its layout would not have been able to enter and leave without leaving physical traces, especially in an environment where trained search teams detected nothing disturbed. And it rules out people simply passing through the area, such as drivers or visitors who had no reason to stop. The disappearance happened within a tight, silent window, a window that would be almost impossible for someone without prior knowledge of the home's routine to operate within. Taken together, investigators now believe the explanation behind the disappearance is intentional, targeted, and carried out by someone with direct knowledge of the property, the layout, and the timing of that specific day. This does not point to a named person, and investigators have not accused or identified anyone. But the overall category of suspect is now far more defined than it has ever been. This shift changes everything. It reshapes how interviews are conducted. It reframes how early statements are interpreted. It elevates previously minor details into potential breakthrough clues. It focuses attention inward, not outward. And most importantly, it marks a new phase in the investigation, one that is more focused, more narrowed, and, for the first time in months, moving with a clearer direction. If this profile is accurate, the real truth is closer than ever, and some earlier statements and timelines might soon face serious re-examination. I'll keep breaking down every detail as it comes out, because if the suspect profile is correct, the next update could finally answer the question everyone has been asking: what really happened, and who is truly responsible?